Thank you.
All right. I did it again. I started the class with all right.
It's okay. It's a trademark. Do it. Just do it.
All right. Well, it's Swami Swahananda's trademark. All right.
With
All right, then. That's how it ended. All right, then.
Yes. Okay, so we're reading The Imitation of Christ because it was one of the two books that Swami Vivekananda carried with him when he wandered through India, this and the Bhagavad Gita. And he had a lot of praise for this book. I used to read this book when I was up at Holy Cross Monastery every morning before the 7 a.m. hour, or chapter, they call it. Before that, the 7 o'clock chapter, I would go in and read in my pew, in my little choir cubicle. So chapter 11, on how to acquire peace and on the desire to improve. We would indeed have peace if we would attend to our affairs. That's pretty true. If you don't neglect things you know you need to do, if you don't put things off, you've got a lot more inner peace than somebody who's always putting things off or just not getting things done that they need to get done. So indeed, it's true. How can you remain in peace when you deliberately interfere in other people's business and seek worldly occupation with seldom a thought to interior recollection? Right, okay. So you see, by getting involved in other people's business, you're automatically not going to have peace of mind because you can't control or change another person. So if you don't love everything they're doing, there's going to be a lack of peace by investing yourself in what they're doing. And these are distractions, anything from the outside that calls our attention. This is why it's impossible to know what comes from inside the body-mind, or from inside from the self, versus what the body-mind are indicating through senses or thought. And so it's good to know the difference, because if you're responding to body-mind, those are external ideas to the self, right? In one sense, the place that most of us are trudging through right now. And so anything that doesn't come from self, that doesn't arise as inspiration spontaneously in the moment, is distraction. It pulls us out of the inner shrine. We have to come out of the inner shrine and be a doer. The inner shrine demands silence and surrender to enter. And if we're not practicing silence and surrender, then we're exiting our shrine. We're being distracted and being pulled into the senses, which, if we're aware of it, isn't so terribly bad, because we can become aware of it and still stay seated in our shrine. But when we actually become moved by it, when it actually comes to dictating our actions and successive thoughts, then we are in a state of egoism. We are no longer aware of our inner, what does he call here, our interior recollection. We're no longer in a state of surrender. We're being doers. The humble and the single-hearted are truly blessed and will have abundant peace. So the humble is that awareness of oneness. Humility is an awareness of oneness. There's no sense of measure, no comparison, because one doesn't compare with one. One is one. And the single-hearted, this is when you know what you love. That's what it is to be single-hearted. The love of God, which is the very content, space, and being of the shrine in the heart. That love, God that is love, is there. And if you can single-mindedly love, then you will very quickly realize your nature. It's our love of things that we mistake for real, or that we think will give us something. This is the fault of Adam and Eve when they ate of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. They ate of the fruit of ego, actually, by going out through the senses. And they didn't just go out through the senses to eat. They went out through the senses to define themselves. So this is always important when you think of who you are, to be aware. Am I defining myself right now from the outside in, which is what Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj says is the habit of the unenlightened? We define ourselves from the outside in. But the saint, he says, the realized self, identifies himself from the inside out. And that's a wonderful practice, to try and describe yourself from the inside out, because you are confronted immediately with the fact that there are no words to describe yourself from the inside out, because there's no boundary, there's no time in there. There's none of the things that we use to describe things. We're just an isness, a point of reference, a seeing. The reason why the saints are so perfectly recollected is that they always sought to abstain from worldly desires, leaving themselves free to give their whole heart to God. Yeah, this I would change the way it's stated here. I take some liberties here because some of these things I read all of my early life and they didn't help me overcome anything. So this idea of the saints were so perfectly recollected is that they always sought to abstain from worldly desires. I wouldn't frame it that way, because that's putting out a forest fire one flame at a time. What they did was know their nature. They knew that they were not the body or the mind, and so desires became impotent for them. They weren't moved by those calls for attention from body, mind, and so they were able to stay true to their nature, to that image of God within, leaving them to give their whole heart to God, leaving them with their whole heart intact in the shrine, as an offering. And what do you offer? You offer your own idea of self. You offer your own egoism, in that shrine. You lay it down at the shrine, at the feet of the deity. But we are absorbed in our own passions and too concerned with passing things, because we have our camp, we have our tent pitched in the mind. We've said, this is where I live, this is who I am, this is where everything goes on, right here in the mind. And so because we've camped, put our sense of self, our sense of being in the mind, we're in the world of change. And the world of change is always insecure and always needy. And there can be no peace there because there is no security there. But we are identified with body, mind. So we're identified with the changing. And because of that, we're forced to live in that changing world. And ego is what we do, what we build in order to feel safe in the constant change. Ego is how we make our effort to become secure, to become whole, to become safe, to become loving, to become caring, to become all of these things, because they are what our nature is, but we see them as attributes to be acquired through sense, through body, through mind. And so we're always chasing a reality that is behind us. And if you're chasing something and it's behind you, you've got a problem because you're running away from it. And so this is our trouble. Because we've identified with these things, that's why we're absorbed in our passions, because that is what the mind tells us the solution is. And we're too concerned with passing things. The past, present, and future has us enslaved. And we're running back and forth between our attachments, the past, and our desires, the future, and skipping over the divine present and not experiencing it. So we're bound with passing things by being concerned with them. And why are we concerned with them? Because we believe that they are ours. We believe that our thoughts are ours. We believe that our body is ours, and that we forget that our identity is separate from them. And so we become very deeply concerned with the body and mind, because after all, that's what we think we are. We seldom overcome even one single fault. We are slow to make progress and therefore remain cold and indifferent. Yeah. Well, we seldom see it's again, it's doing that individual firefight thing. We seldom overcome even a single fault. That's because that's not the way faults are dealt with. Faults are dealt with at the source. They're not dealt with once they become a thing of in and of themselves, right? This is why we want to get to that silent space in the heart there, where we can see the spark of a thought before it becomes a state of mind. Because a spark can be easily snuffed before it has become a fire, right? And so we do our practice not to overcome all of our sins and all of our shortcomings and all of our wrong thinking. We don't sit for that, right? We sit to know what we are. We sit in the presence and lay down everything, so that our success comes through transcendence, not through conquering, right? Because we transcend body by knowing we are not body. We transcend mind by knowing we are not mind. And we take on virtue because we know that that is our nature. We know that we are the image of God. And so by removing our habits, bad habits, then the natural self, that which is native to us, Satchitananda, then acts, then manifests through us like that. And so we don't really see it as running and changing our behaviors. You know, we're not imitating Christ, despite the name of the book. We are being Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. I think it's in Galatians that Paul says that, one of his letters, if that's wrong. So this notion of we remain cold and indifferent, that cold and indifference comes, that's a very dangerous place to be, actually. The cold and indifferent comes when you've kind of given up, you know, when you've have squelched your inner inspiration for freedom. That's when you become cold and indifferent. You've basically returned to ego, and extreme egoism is coldness. Extreme egoism is indifference, right? It's not an indifference that has come through discernment, through awareness, but it's an indifference that comes through ignorance, ignoring the reality, ignoring the failures. You're just not going to deal with them anymore. You're just going to now live a worldly life, which is what is a worldly life. It's finding solutions through the senses for your inner lack of peace. And all the world can ever do for you is distract you from your lack of peace. And so we accept that because we don't know how to find our inner peace. We don't know how to find it through body mind because of our identity. So we take the next best thing, which is distraction, where we get a moment's peace because we get distracted from our lack of peace inside. So this is what happens when we build. This is that parable of Jesus. You know, the wise man builds his house upon the rock. The rains came tumbling down, the winds blew, but his house stood firm because it was built on the rock. And what is the rock? It's the unchanging. It's the shrine of the heart, the unchanging absolute. But the foolish man, you know, you sit there, do your head. The foolish man built his house upon the sand. Foolish man built his house upon the sand. You know, the foolish man built his house upon the sand, and then the rains came and the house went tumbling down because he built on the changing. There is no foundation in the changing. If we would die to self-love, soon we would enjoy spiritual things, and then we would experience heavenly contemplation. The same thing here. this self-love he's referring to is egoism, the egoism that loves body mind. It loves its individual self. The things that make it different from the whole are the things that it's proud of. So in egoism, you like unique things about yourself because they distinguish you from the oneness, from the wholeness. So it's the complete opposite of where contentment lies. It's the complete opposite of where your inner peace is. And so this self-love, if we could just give up this love of the body, give up this love of the mind, give up this love of our personality and our separateness from the whole, we would enjoy spiritual things, the things that bring us to unity, the things that we begin to see ourselves in everyone. And then we would experience heavenly contemplation, right? Because we would be withdrawing from the things of the change, the things of the changing world. We would be transcending those things and becoming the observer. And so it would be a spiritual contemplation, as he says, a heavenly contemplation, because heaven is where? That's where the kingdom of God is. It's within you. And heaven is anywhere where your nature is manifesting spontaneously without the cognition of mind or the constant nag of the body. As it is, we do not force ourselves to overcome our passions and disorderly desires and to follow the path of saints. And this is our greatest obstacle to contemplation. Oh boy. Yeah, see, they get themselves in so much trouble with these kinds of words. As it is, we do not force ourselves to overcome our passions and disorderly desires, really, because as long as you think that they're your passions, and that they're your disorderly desires, it's very hard to let go of them. You feel like you're giving up yourself. And, without a knowledge that the self lies elsewhere, you cling to these things. So it's not really a matter of forcing. Yes, discipline is there. But you see, there's two ways to do spiritual life. If you do spiritual life using this kind of idea where you're forcing yourself to overcome your passions and your disorderly desires and forcing yourself to follow the saints, you're being driven. You require a fear. You require God behind you with a whip. Get going. That's the guilt and the shame that everybody complains about. We don't want to be driven in our spiritual life. We want to be inspired. We want to be called. We want God in front of us, inspiring us higher. We don't want him behind us, chastising, whipping, and forcing us forward, because it can't be done that way. As long as you approach it that way, there's going to be bitterness, there's going to be anger, there's going to be lots of failure, and there's going to be a lot of wounds from that. You can't change yourself. Love will change you. Love is God, and love is within. And love changes us not through force, but through inspiration, through presenting us with a higher ideal that's true to ourselves. And we feel that inner bliss, we feel that inner peace when we respond to that inspiration, to that calling. But as long as you've got something behind you, forcing you, driving you, pushing you, that's a very sad place to live, because even in success, there's fear. Even in success, there's remorse and some resentment from having been forced, from having been driven, from having been motivated by fear. As soon as any little difficulty comes our way, we are easily cast down and turn to human consolation. Yeah. Again, that's because if you're living in that changing space and not aware that you're just the observer, that you're just the witness, you take yourself as the agent and you own the responsibility of all the actions being done by body-mind, which are actually only being done in and of their own accord because of karma, because of samskara, because of the wheel of samsara running over us. Right? And so the body mind, believe it or not, carries on even when you know that it's not you. Because it's just obeying karmas. Your actions of the body and actions of the mind are just products of karma. So your body will live, and your mind will get you to work, and your mind will take care of your responsibilities, because that's how it does it. It's not you, and it's not necessary for you to get those things done. Why? Because actually nothing's being done. It's very much like a dream. Look at the world today. There's different names and different faces, but isn't it pretty much the same world we've been living in for the last 60 years? Nothing, what has really changed? It just doesn't seem like things really actually improve or get better in this world. It's the dog's curly tail. And so with all of our efforts through thousands of years of trying to build a better society, to build a better human, we're pretty much where we started, because that's the nature of delusion, the nature of the universe. If only we would exert ourselves and take a firm stand in this battle, we would see how God comes to our aid, for he is always ready to help those who put their trust in him. He even provides occasions for us to do battle so that we will overcome and be victorious. Yeah. If only we would exert ourselves. And how do we exert ourselves? We exert ourselves through reminding. We exert ourselves through discernment. We exert ourselves through presence, through being aware of the presence in the moment. We exert ourselves by pulling ourselves out of the past to make sure that it's not the past that's dictating our habits to us in the moment, that's dictating our perspective in the moment, right? We leave the past behind, and instead of being motivated by past behaviors, we're motivated by present isness, that nature of the self. And that presence, that present nature of the self is God. So when he says God comes to our aid, it's not that God came to our aid because he was somewhere else and now he's here. It's because he's always been here, but we were looking elsewhere. We were looking to the body, looking to the mind, and didn't notice him standing beside us. And so when we start taking our eyes out of the binoculars of body-mind, we become aware of God standing next to us. We become aware of ourself being in the presence. And it's through that God coming to our aid, in that sense, God being allowed to aid us by our awareness of him, of her, that he is always there, always ready to help him for those who trust him. And that's a very true statement. Trust him is knowing him, accepting him, that nature of pure love, unconditioned love, that nature of grace, that nature of wisdom. By accepting that as our core nature, we become built on that. Once we start thinking of ourselves as all of the adjectives that we apply to ourselves, those are all tenuous and temporary. All those things change. And so we won't be able to find peace in them. If our religion consists only in outward observances, our piety will soon come to an end. Absolutely, pretty much everything will soon come to an end. If you keep your spiritual life just about externals, well, then you don't have one, really. There's not much going on there. So if our religion consists only in outward observances, our piety will soon come to an end. We had better lay our axe to the root, that being purged from our passions, we may possess our soul in peace. Okay, so they're laying an axe to the root. That's discerning where your impetus for action is coming from. If it's coming from body-mind, that's the root. And you say, I'm not body. So I have a choice whether I fulfill that request of the body or not. I'm not the mind. I have a choice whether I respond to that thought or that state of mind or not. And so that's laying it to the root. The root is your identity, to remain in the I am, and to have as few adjectives connected to that as possible, the ideal being none. But if we can't get to the none, as far as adjectives to put after I am, then we put after I am things like I am a servant of God. I am the lover of God. I am, God's friend. These identities of ego, Ramakrishna says, are not harmful. They don't cause delusion. They actually are healing ideals that will bring us closer to truth over time. So if you can't get rid of ego completely, if you can't get that mind completely silent, it's all right. It's all right. Just know yourself to be in relationship with the divine, that you are the servant or the lover of the divine, and let that be your expression in your moment. Let that be your expression in what you do and why you do. And that will be a very close simulation of being spontaneously inspired by your very own nature, by the nature of God within. If we would overcome one fault a year, we would soon be perfect. Can we just leave that one lie there? That one, there's a real fallacy of thinking in that. That's when Thakur says, remember the story of the farmer, that his wife came out and told him that his neighbor, the farmer next door, was renouncing his wives one at a time. And the farmer, his wife, was telling the farmer, her husband, like, oh, he's such a noble man, he's renouncing the world one wife at a time. Look at you have no renunciation at all. And what does the farmer say? The farmer says, that's not renunciation. This is renunciation. He throws his towel over his shoulder and walks off and never comes back. Just renounces the world utterly. And Ramakrishna makes the point of saying, if you do it one thing at a time, you'll never get there. That's not how we do this. Go for the root. Know who you are. The point is not to get rid of all those things. The point is to know who you are so that you can be who you are. Right now you're being something, but it's not who you are. And that's translating as vice, as a loss of inner peace. So our focus is not on our behaviors. This is something that Christianity is very cruel about, because it doesn't work this way. You cannot win this way. And I think if you take an objective look at what Christianity is suffering, what certain branches of Christianity are experiencing these days, you can see the truth of the statement. You can't get there this way. You can't force yourself into virtue. You can't force yourself into godliness. You can't overcome your faults as faults. They're manifesting because of a deeper problem. They're not problems in and of themselves. In and of themselves, they're just behaviors, but they're being caused by a wrong thinking. And that's where we have to go. That's, if you would stay with the idea of go cut the root, that's where you will find success. Know who you are, and then you begin acting like you are. You start being who you are. Right now, we're being who we are, but we have the wrong idea. We've got the idea of being this body mind. And so we're selfish and we're self-consumed. And we look for things like name and fame and lust and greed, things that build up a sense of God in the finite. But it's not helpful. It isolates and it kills, actually. So if we overcome one fault a year, we would soon be perfect. We're just going to let that lie there. But often we find that we were better and purer when we first turned to God than after years supposedly spent in his service. Well, yes, and that would be because you're running on inspiration at the beginning like that. You've got a lot of hope, and you've got a lot of newness, a lot of potential in this ideal that you're accepting. So yes, the beginning years we are sometimes a little bit more virtuous. Like I remember when I first took my initiation and was taught how to meditate. I was practicing for several hours a day, all the time, because not because I was trying to practice more time. Like nowadays, if I do more meditation, it's more because I've made the decision to do more meditation. But back then, I remember my state of mind was so different. I really expected to realize God every time I sat down to meditate. And so that inspiration inspired me to sit there longer, thinking maybe just a few more minutes. It could happen at any moment here. And I had that fresh newness and faith in me. So yes, in that sense, it's true. You know, as we get older, we kind of, after 23 years of meditation, you're thinking, what's going on? And it's a little harder to feel that inspiration in the moment, but it is nonetheless still true that you could realize God today, and it could happen in this moment. And so it is the right way. It is a healthy thing to sit down with the expectation of realization, with the expectation of seeing God. After all, she is everywhere present. So where are you where you're not with her already? And so this is what our practice is. It's sitting there and accepting truth, accepting that God is everywhere present and always perfect, accepting that you are not the mind, you are not the body, that you are not born, you don't suffer death. You are already free. Within you, there's both Shakti and Shiva. They're both within you right now. Shiva is the realization. Shakti is the changing waves of the mind, right? The power of God, the power that creates the universe, the waves of the mind, thought. And so, I don't know where I was going with all of that all of a sudden, but anyway. So yes, in the beginning, it's sometimes our inspirations are a little bit pure to begin with, but that doesn't mean much because it's the wizened, the fruit of constantly getting up and discerning, going forward, that matures us, that ripens us, right? Actually, our fervor and desire for virtue should increase every day as we grow older, and it will, but it's not our love of virtue, it's our love of love that manifests virtue. It's our love of God, it's our companionship with the divine that increases our virtue. It's the more that we believe that we are spirit, that we are Satchitananda, the more we're convinced of that, the more we see it inside as an experiential truth that we are not body and not mind. To that extent, we become virtuous, and it increases, and we do grow in love with that, and we start wanting to think only of God, to think only of love, because it gives us our inner peace. It gives us our inner peace, our inner silence, our completeness, our wholeness, and takes away all of the other things that are constantly always calling us out, right? And so this is what happens as we grow older. We become more accustomed to the presence. And in that presence, virtue manifests in us, not because we're making choices, not because we're calculating new behaviors, but because we're coming from a true seed, a true notion of isness. But now it is considered wonderful if we still hold on to a spark of our first fervor. It is far easier to break evil habits at the outset, for then acts of virtue are done more easily and with a happy heart. Oh boy, there's some truth in the way that he's wording these things. It's just such an old way of thinking for me, that, and I suspect this thinking works for some people, but I tell you, it destroyed me. It is far easier to break evil habits at the outset. Yeah, but the outset is your birth. You know, yes, it would be much easier to do the right thing if you had never did the wrong thing. There is wisdom in that, and it's true. Uh, you know, but we didn't do that. And now we have a very stale and very established sense of self that's very firmly rooted in attachment and our past, that it's hard to break out of that. And most of the difficulty of spiritual life is because of that. Spiritual life otherwise would be very simple. How difficult is it to be what you are? That's all of spiritual life. Just be what you are. But you have to know who you are. And so if we had known that from the beginning, yes, it would have been very simple to be who we are. But the fact is that we were being formed by a society of the deluded. People were coming into my kindergarten class. What do you want to be when you grow up? You know, and we would celebrate. Oh, bring a food from your heritage. You know, it's like all of these notions of externals and defining ourselves that way have been heaped on us consistently all through life. What are you going to do? Where are you going to go to college? What do you want to be? You know, who are you going to marry? All of these things that are asked of us from our very early days all the way forward. So yes, if we didn't have all of that, it would be much easier. But we do have all of that. So what's the point of saying this? Unless you just want to be mired in guilt and shame, which, you know, for controlling somebody, that's handy, but for inspiring somebody, that's deadly. Forget it. It is not easy to break bad habits and harder still to give up your own will. Whew, that is true. That is true. It is not easy to break bad habits, right? And so we usually sort of train them to be toward God. You know, it's like what Thakur says, which he says, I still don't understand what he meant by that. He says, if you have to have lust, if you have to be a lusty person, then lust for God. So it's taking your vices and giving them a spiritual turn. You know, that is the beginning of turning them around. Because they're only going to change again, like we said, when you begin to suspect that you are not the cause of them, that you are not the body, and you're not the mind, which is where all vice comes from. Right? It's not easy to break bad habits, and harder still to give up your own will. But if you do not overcome the little things, how do you expect to overcome the greater? Right? Therefore, resist your evil inclinations and start to break off bad habits, or little by little they will lead you into greater difficulties. This is very true. If you start ignoring your efforts, or if you give yourself permissions, which is usually more the case, we think, oh, that's such a small thing. Oh, that's not a big deal. Or, oh, I'm doing better than I used to. If we start measuring like that, then we lose the point, because this isn't an acquisition that we're involved in. This isn't a an accomplishment. It's an isness. It's a returning to a pure is, instead of a defined is, a grossly ill-defined isness. You know, an isness that involves change and temporary natures. If only you would think of the great interior peace you would have, and how happy you would make others by doing good, you would be more eager to grow in virtue. That is true. If you only think of the great interior peace, and that is where the emphasis is. You know, our change comes by knowing our interior nature, knowing the shrine within, where there is an absolute beautiful, transcendent stillness that's pregnant with meaning and with wisdom. So if you think of that place, if you remember that place constantly, that's slowly moving toward presence. That's slowly moving toward awareness, where you are mindful in the moment. So if you would only think of the great interior peace you would have had, and how happy you would make others by doing good, right? You make others happy, you make yourself happy. by doing good, because others are just mirrors of you. So it's making your own self happy. And somebody will say, "Oh, well, well, that's why I do my vices, to make me happy." I says, "No, you don't do your vices to make you happy. You do your vices to forget being unhappy." Yeah. And there's a very distinct difference there, because your vices cannot make you happy. They give you a little blip of pleasure, or a blip of joy, or a blip of happiness, and you indulge in it and enjoy it, but ultimately it's over. And then you're worse off than you were, because now you've got nothing again. As long as you're grabbing from the outside, you will always come home at night with nothing. It will not change you. It will not improve you. It will not set you free. It will not give you inner peace. Inner peace can only be accepted. It cannot be created. Right? It is your nature, and you have to accept who you are and let go of who you are not. Let go of the demands and pursuits of body, mind, pleasures, hungers, tastes, touches, smells, visions. Let go of these things and return to that part that is simply, that has always been there, the Shiva in you, that wonderful observer who needs nothing, requires nothing, is in his own bliss, always is the source of his own happiness. So sit in that place. Chapter 12, on the advantage of not having everything our own way. Has anybody ever had everything their own way? Has anybody even managed to have a single day? Even your birthday. Have you ever even had a birthday where everything went your way? So apparently that's an advantage. And it is an advantage, because hopefully eventually you'll give it up, right? Give up opinions. No need for opinions. Only have opinions when they're absolutely necessary. It is good that everything is not always to our liking, for adversity makes people look into their hearts in order to realize that they are exiles and must not put their hopes in any worldly thing. There it is. Very, very, very Christian way of saying it, but this is the truth right here, what he just says. We're in exile. That's a wonderful way to say that. As long as you're identified with body, mind, you're exiled. You're not in the Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden was perfect harmony with a single will, the ideal will of the divine, which is our own highest will, right? And when we broke that harmony, why? How? By just doing exactly what Eve did. When she looked at the fruit, she saw it beautiful. So she went out through the senses and she found a beauty out there. And she didn't leave it at that. She could have just found it beautiful, praised the Lord for making beautiful fruit, and gone on and been happy. But she had a second thought. It looks like it would be good for food. It looks like it requires an action. I must have this. I must eat this. Why? Because of the third thing. It will give me wisdom and make me like God. It will make me whole. It will make me happy and content. So she went out through the senses, and then Adam followed her, went out through the senses to identify themselves, and went out through the senses to get what they thought they were missing. And what did it do to them? The first thing it did to them was make them afraid. God came walking in the cool of the day, and they ran and hid in fear. Why? Because they have become, they changed their knowledge of themselves as the infinite to a knowledge of themselves as a body. And how do we know that happened? Because the second thing that happened was they felt naked and were ashamed, right? And God had to make them clothing to cover their shame. And so at that point, they were exiled. At that point, God says to them, look, you've chosen to live according to desire. And if you're going to live according to desire, you're going to spend all of your days scraping at the dust of the earth in order to fulfill your desires. And is that not what all of us do? Going off to work every day for what? To pay for your desires. And the more desires you have, the harder you have to work. The bigger your house, the bigger the car, the bigger the family, the bigger the desires, the harder you will work. And the more entangled you become and the more confused you become, because you will not be any happier on the day that you die than the day you graduated high school. And you'll wonder, God, what happened? What did I spend all my time on that I'm still the same person that I've always been? It is good for us to run into opposition and to have others think badly of us, even when our intentions are good, right? Because you'll have to take refuge. You'll have to take refuge. And where will you take refuge? In the shrine of the heart, in the company of God. So those things, we only look for change when we're uncomfortable, right? If you're sitting in your big comfy chair, you're not looking to move. You're like, oh, I'm fine right here. And so God puts things in there that keep you, like the metaphor I like is that in Maya, all blankets are 6 inches too short. And God designed it that way because he didn't want you to make your home here in the temporary. So nothing lasts, nothing is comfortable. Everything gets itchy in Maya. And it's that itchiness that he's here is telling us that's the good thing. Because it's when you're itchy that you scratch. And you start looking, gosh, why am I so miserable? What's causing? That's why Sri Nisargadatta says, all pain is an invitation to inquiry. Go look for an attachment. If you feel pain or if you're suffering, there's attachment somewhere. Look for that attachment in that pain and suffering and let go of it. Let go of it. For these things help us to be humble and to rid us of pride. Yes. Actually, yes, that's true, because they help us approach that silence. But it's actually that inner silence that is our humility, and that inner silence that is our lack of pride, because we identify with the universal in that inner silence. We surrender our independence, our particular self is surrendered there. Then we seek God more earnestly, who alone knows our inmost self, who alone is our inmost self, when outwardly we are ignored and discredited by others. Yes. So really the lesson here is don't do what Eve was doing. Don't go out through your senses to make yourself whole. Don't think that you lack something that has to be acquired in this world in order to know God. It's the absolute opposite. If you were needed to acquire something in this world, you'd be able to take it with you if it had any value. But you can't take anything with you. It all stays here. You came in naked, you're going to leave naked. And so if you can't learn that lesson, think about it. If you came in with nothing and you leave with nothing, then how can acquiring be the point of life? Whether it's acquiring a spiritual perspective or not. You can't acquire anything. You leave as you come. And so know your nature. Find the nature that you came in with, and leave with that, because that nature is your virtue. It is your access to virtue. Therefore, people should rely so entirely on God that they have no need to look for human consolations when adversity comes. Yes, that's why God says, take refuge in me alone. Not in cupcakes, not in margaritas. Take your refuge in me alone. And that only works when you've done a lot of sitting and actually have God as a friend. That you've actually touched the feet of your beloved within. You've at least seen his toes sticking out from under the curtain of Maya. If you haven't found that within, how are you going to look for that within? How are you going to run there when adversity comes in the outside world? So this is why we practice. We practice to realize the presence of God that has always been within us. And then we begin to become aware of the peace, become aware of the security, become aware of the strength, become aware of the impetus to discipline and manifesting that self freely outside. When people of good disposition are afflicted or tempted or distracted by evil thoughts, then they understand the need they have of God, and that without him they can do nothing. This is true. This is very true. You don't exist without God. So give up this notion that God ever goes somewhere. If God left you alone for a second, your body would just pop, gone. Not there anymore. Because your existence, God is existence, and therefore you exist. God is love, therefore you are loving. God is wisdom, therefore you are wise. So those three things we have as our contract that God will never leave us. Because if he does, those three things instantaneously are gone, which means you are instantaneously gone. Your notion of self. Then too they grieve, while they sigh and pray because of the miseries they endure. They grow weary of this life and long for death in order to be with Christ, their Lord. It will also be clear to them that there is neither perfect peace nor security in this world. That is true, not in the world and not, but there can be perfect peace, within you. In this world. In this world, there is always at least a grain of salt of imperfection, of impurity, because it is true that you can't have any manifestation without some impurity. That's why Thakur would live for the love of the devotees. That's why when he would to come down from samadhi, he would make up a desire. I want a glass of water. Give me a glass of water. Oh, I want a sweet. Give me a sweet. He would create a desire in order to come back into the body. Because he was an avatar, he could soar constantly out of the body. And the only thing that would bring him back was creating a desire. So in the same way, our teacher here is telling us, there's nothing in this world for you. Don't go into this world for anything, thinking that you need it. Otherwise, you grow weary of this life. Now, he says they grow weary of this life and long for death in order to be with Christ. That's because the Christians have that notion that eternal life starts after you die, which I love to say that because just in saying that, it shows how absurd that idea is. Your immortality began long ago. Your eternity is now. And you can experience that now as soon as you step out of mind into the silence. When you learn to step out of mind, to disidentify with mind, the first thing you become aware of is timelessness. Time is the rate of thought in the mind. And without thought, when the mind is pure, when it's calm, there's no wave caused by the ideas of me and mine from selfishness. The first thing you become aware of is your eternity, your nature outside time. Second thing you become aware of is just such a wonderful love, such a wonderful peace within. It will also be clear to them that there is neither perfect peace nor security in this world. That's right, because this world is the world of change. This is the world, this is the mind. The world is mind, disturbed mind with waves. And so you can't make a home here. It's foolish. It's the foolish man building on the sand to make your home here, to decide to put all of your efforts into a big house and a good view and nice food and good clothes. To put all of your energy into those things, it will be a waste because you'll just have to keep replacing them and keep fixing them because they'll keep disappearing on you. There is no security here. So go to God and God alone. That's the motto of the seeker. For me, it is God and God alone.